now I'm just checking that macOS isn't doing the thing. Ooh, that was an interesting realization.
Oh, yeah?
So I'm playing League of Legends. I have for many years. I mainly only play it because it's something I started playing with my best friends back in Berlin, and that is our excuse to have a Skype call to catch up. Because men can't just have a phone call. You need to play a video game, so you have a reason to talk.
I actually do the same with my dad. We play Rocket League at the same time.
Amazing.
It's having a catch-up, yeah.
And for a while, after some time, whenever I played League of Legends with Bluetooth headphones, it would pitch lower. All the sound, both my friend over voice call, but also the League sound, like League of Legends game sounds, would be lower pitched.
Now, it's obviously not just playing the sound slower, because that doesn't work in a live, a live environment. So it's actually pitching it down. That's interesting.
Well, I was like, what is happening? If I plug in via wire, it's fine. Everything is normal. And I couldn't figure it out, and I just made my peace with it. And yesterday I reopened that can of worms and figured out that you can actually see more about your audio device's details if you open macOS's audio MIDI settings. Like, it's nowhere in the sound settings, but in the MIDI settings you can see how many channels, which codec, sampling rate, all that jazz.
And you can create virtual audio devices and stuff, which is
actually, like, if you have multiple Bluetooth headphones, you can create a virtual device to output sound to all of them.
Yeah.
This is not what this is about. What I discovered there, more by accident, is that these headphones that I have were via Bluetooth connected at 44.1 kilohertz sampling rate, which is fine. But I actually would have thought they would go for 48 because, they have a higher quality chip than that. And, I started Googling a bit, and there's some other headphones. And for some reason, for a while now, Mac has a 48 kilohertz disallow list. It just doesn't let you do 48 kilohertz, even if your headphones support them. And it's like, I'm not that much of an audiophile, that's fine. But it turns out at the same time, there is a new thing called the macOS game mode, which kind of forces your display into high refresh rates. When you go in a game in full screen, it kind of automatically activates. But because you're in full screen, I didn't know it existed because your taskbar is one. If you tap out, you see it as an icon on the top. And I learned it also forces 48 kilohertz. They describe it as it doubles your sampling rate, which I'm not sure is actually true.
Yeah, I could do some maths and figure out that that's not quite double, but okay.
But what I think is happening, and my tests seem to confirm that, is that as far as League of Legends is concerned, the game thinks the system is running at 48 kilohertz. But my headphones, because they're on the 48 kilohertz disallow list, are still on 44 kilohertz. Now, if you do that math, you can kind of imagine how it might end up sounding lower pitched if League is generating 48,000 samples per second, but they're played at 44,000 samples a second.
And it's just dropping samples at some interval to cope with the live.
There was a regular clicking sound when there was a buffer underrun or something. And so now I figured out, I had to tap out once, click that icon in the top and say, disable game mode, and all my sounds are back to happy sounds.
Oh, there you go. Welcome everyone to Off the Main Thread, the new audiophile podcast concerned mostly with Bluetooth and sample rates.
This podcast is sponsored by diamond-coated USB cables. So Jake, what are we talking about today?
Oh, yeah, okay. On today's podcast, we're gonna talk about Apple and Safari and a new EU ruling and how...
Oh, did something happen?
Yes, a thing has happened, and it's happening live. Like I'm hoping by the time we get this podcast out, there won't be loads of change and it will still be relevant. But yes, important and scary things are happening. I'm going to talk through it, and then we'll see what we've got time for after that, and see what we've got time for, and we might record a new intro if we do have time.
Yeah.
And we'll tease it. Okay. It's going to be a fun one for Lucas. Enjoy. What do you think? Are we diving straight into the content after that?
I mean, I feel like it was hard to not be aware of the news that, how Apple is changing the rules around the App Store and browsers and iOS and all that jazz. But at the same time, there was also a lot of information and misinformation and reaction videos, and I'm not a lawyer, 18 tweet summaries. So I think we might need the time. So I think we jump right in and try to get a canonical, authoritative summary from you.
Oh, okay. Well, in order to do that, I think we need to travel back through time. So take my hand, Surma, as we journey back to 2013. All right, here we are in 2013. It's really 2013 because if you listen very carefully, you can hear "Get Lucky" by Daft Punk playing on a loop on every radio station in the world. I mean, listeners to the podcast won't be able to hear that because of a series of licensing issues. But Surma, you can hear it, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's not what we're here for. Right, follow me. Come here. Take a look through that window.
Wait, is that Steve Ballmer?
Yes, it is.
Why is he so sweaty, and why does he look so sad?
Well, he's sweaty because he usually is, but he's looking sad because the EU just fined Microsoft 561 million euros. And the reason for that, or at least the core of the reason, is that Internet Explorer is bundled with Windows. And the EU ruled Microsoft's tying of Internet Explorer to the Windows operating system harms competition between web browsers, undermines product innovation, and ultimately reduces consumer choice. That was their quote. And that ruling was actually in 2009, following earlier investigations into the bundling of Windows Media Player with Windows. And it follows a similar case back in 2001 in the US, which was also about the bundling of Internet Explorer and threatened to split Microsoft up, although that didn't happen. But this ruling actually has a clear user-facing impact. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but the agreement was that when you run Internet Explorer, you would be taken to a website, browserchoice.eu. This is a website built by Microsoft that essentially said, "Hey, did you know that there are other browsers? There's other browsers, and here are some download links." And this you would there'd be links for Internet Explorer, obviously, Firefox, Chrome, Opera, Safari, because Safari for Windows was a thing at the time. But you'd also get links to Avant browser, Flock, Green browser, Chameleon, Maxthon, Sleipnir, and Slim browser. Right, these were all.
Is this one of those games where I have to figure out which browser is the fake one?
Yeah, right. They were. I know, right? They were all real. Actually, I bring this fact up all the time because it amuses me. But I still think the best browser name ever created was the web browser for the Amiga operating system Workbench. That was called iBrowse, as in iBrowse. And that's the name Apple should have used. They should have taken that name. It's a much better name.
So that site was an actual thing. I'm assuming it doesn't exist anymore?
It doesn't. It was shut down. So the ruling that EU made was they had to do this until 2014, and as soon as it wasn't needed anymore, the site disappeared.
I would have expected then that all the buttons would just move out of the way from your mouse cursor, and just underneath would be an Internet Explorer button.
Well, the browsers were presented in random order, although in two sections. There was the sort of popular ones at the top, and then that kind of bag of ones you've never heard of afterwards. So when companies are told to behave, they behave in the minimum way possible, right? Given the rules. So that bit of code that would take you to that website, that bit of code would only be triggered if you haven't been taken to the browserchoice.eu screen before, which is fair enough. It's a one-time thing. You wouldn't be taken there if you had a different browser set as the default, which again is fair enough. If you've got a different browser set as the default, you're aware of your browser choice.
Indeed.
That code would only run if you were in the EU, right? This is it. Microsoft don't want to do this, but the EU have ruled it, So they're only going to run it in places where the EU has jurisdiction. Right. Okay.
Did they also check whether you are, in fact, in the EU?
Yes. So I guess they IP geofence. I'm not actually sure what the mechanism was. It might have been down to the settings in the browser, maybe, like if you'd indicated where you were in like time zones and stuff.
Yeah, I was going to wonder if your time zone is set to like, San Francisco, North America, they'd go like, nope, no browser choice for you.
That's a good question. Yeah, I'm not sure what the mechanism was. But they also checked that if you were running Windows XP or higher, and this was just kind of a deal that they didn't have to support like ancient operating systems. Like Windows 7 was out at this point. So, having this running in Windows XP was actually pretty good support. But that last rule was implemented using an allow list of operating system versions for where to trigger this. And what happened is Windows 7 Service Pack 1 came out, which is a new operating system version, and whoopsie, someone forgot to add it to the list. So that code just wasn't running for people using Microsoft's latest operating system. And because, adding a string to a list is the third hardest problem in computer science, this went unpatched for 14 months, right? And the EU were not best pleased about this, and so that is why they fined Microsoft 561 million euros.
The fine was for that oversight, not for the anti-competitive thing originally.
Well, it sort of was, because the rule was there because of the anti-competitive thing, and Microsoft hadn't followed the rules. I mean, Microsoft said it was just down to this bug, but,
Oh, so just because I clearly was not in, like, paying attention to web at the time in 2013, but the anti-competitive ruling came without a fine originally. They just got a mandate to link to that site. And then because they didn't fully comply with the new service pack, that's where the fine then came in.
Exactly.
I see.
Exactly. And that was in 2013. But further back...
Yeah, I would be sad if I was Steve Ballmer.
Yes, exactly. That's why it's not why he's sweaty, but it is why he's sad. But that was back in 2013. And further back in 2007, everyone was listening to Umbrella by Rihanna, but there was another Steve, a happier Steve, Steve Jobs, and he released the iPhone. Now, the iPhone had a bundled browser, Safari. There was no browser choice screen in the EU or anywhere else, and that's because there was no browser choice to be had. But there was actually no app choice to be had. Like, the iPhone released without apps, right? The only company who could make apps for the iPhone was Apple. It wasn't a restriction on browsers specifically. In fact...
Which at the time was completely normal. Like, I mean, phones were, like, that was kind of the first smartphone. Like, phones before that, you couldn't install stuff.
Well, you could. I mean, so around this time, I had a Nokia Symbian device, and I had a Game Boy emulator running on it, and that's what I was playing on the train at the time. But no, in this world, if you wanted to create an app, this is what Steve set up on stage. Like, you would build a web app, and it will run in the fancy, fully featured Safari browser.
What a visionary. I
thought it was great. Like, I was really happy to hear that. But app developers were not happy. And Apple actually really quickly reversed on their decision in the same year. And in 2008, the following year, they released their SDK and App Store.
I mean, the vision is kind of great, but the web of 2007, which I have to admit, I do not know well at all, did not lend itself to building apps.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the app, but yes, we didn't have things like WASM, right? Like, we didn't have... I'm pretty sure we didn't have WebGL at the time running on an iPhone for sure.
I'm trying to remember when jQuery UI came out, because or if it was a layer on top of jQuery UI that gave you the iOS skeuomorphic look and feel.
That's
that was
right.
A thing.
Yeah, I remember playing with that. So yes, I think it's kind of fair that they opened up the their SDK and all of that. And if you wanted to play in this world, and this is still like true today, you pay $100 a year to their developer program, but more profitably for Apple, certainly, they take 30% of revenue, and that's from the sales of the app itself, if you charge for it, but also of purchases and subscriptions made within the app. That's the deal you opt into. Apps can only be installed via the Apple App Store, and they have final say of what can and can't exist in there. One rule in particular, the famous rule that web developers go on about a lot, the rule is apps that browse the web must use the appropriate WebKit framework and WebKit JavaScript. And that's the rule that outright bans other browser engines on iOS.
Correct.
Now, you can download other browsers from the App Store. You can download Chrome, you can download Firefox, but these are just wrappers around Safari. You're not using Chromium and you're not using Gecko. It's the engine where the web platform features are implemented. So, you're
right.
Yes.
So you still get, as Chrome on iOS, you still get access to syncing your profile and your saved passwords and all the that stuff. But the code that turns your HTML and CSS into the image on screen, that is code by Apple that the authors of Chrome for iOS cannot change or augment or move forward if they needed to.
Exactly. And that means Apple gets to set the limit of what the web is capable of on iOS. And that has been the state of things for over 15 years. And
their justification for this, I assume, I don't know if this is ever, if they have confirmed this, but I'm guessing that they're framing this as a protecting their users feature, as in they want to make sure that executing code from random places on the internet, which the web is kind of doing, does not compromise the user's data or privacy or stuff like that. I'm not sure if that's actually true, but I would suspect that would be their reasoning.
Yeah, the reasoning is something security something.
Right.
But the more they say, well, we've got to do it to protect users, the more it suggests that they're not protecting users on macOS, where you can install other browsers with other engines. And it blows my mind that Apple have just got away with this for 15 years. Because on Windows, and on macOS, but on Windows, users were free to install whatever browser they wanted with whatever engine. Yet in 2013, Microsoft got a €500 million smackdown for merely failing to directly point out to users that they had this freedom.
Yeah.
And I think it was right that they were fined. I think we both agree with that. But at the same time, Apple was outright preventing other engines from existing on their platform. And it seems like it's really poorly understood that they're doing this.
Yeah.
And I've whinged a lot about this over the last 15 years. But even recently, when I tweet about it, I'll get replies from people with web developer in their bio saying things like, I got Chromium installed on my iPhone, you doofus, just get it from the App Store. Even though in the tweet I'm explaining the difference between the two, it is confusing. I get it. It still surprises me after 15 years that many developers don't realize that Apple has gotten away with banning competing browser engines on their platform,
Yeah, and the inconsistency here between macOS and iOS is something that has always confused me a bit because, for example, iOS phones and tablets are very locked down that, as far as I know, you can't even, sideload apps without being a part of the developer program.
Correct, yes.
While on Android, you can, and I know many people are saying that's just for piracy. I also think there are some other reasons why you want to maybe, I don't know, circumvent a government blocking your access to certain data resources or...
Apple's rules as well. Apple's rules,
Yeah, exactly. And I think we've really reached a point where the difference between desktop and mobile really isn't that important anymore. And on the Mac, on macOS and the laptops, not only can you install pretty much whatever you like, you are even allowed to install a different operating system. Like Apple allows it. It doesn't support it. They're not giving you tools to do that easily, but it is very much not forbidden by the user agreement that you agree to when you buy one of those laptops. And just the mobile operating system seems to be the polar opposite.
Yeah, and even on Chrome OS, you can install the Android and Linux versions of Firefox, right? That's even on an operating system that's by name based around another browser. You can still install other browser engines.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell, the way they've gotten away with this is because iOS doesn't have the same kind of monopoly that Windows had. So iOS has a global smartphone share that's less than 30%, and it depends where you get your figures from. Some say it's 16%. And the rest of the share is Android. So Android is a much bigger player globally. In the US...
It's funny how the reputation or like the perception does not match that. At least in our tech bubble.
And I think there's a couple of reasons for this. In the US, iOS does have the majority share, but it's still just around 55, 60%. Certainly not the kind of numbers we use when talking about monopolies. But like you say, it doesn't feel like it tells the whole story. And I think this is because iOS users have a lot of influence over web developers because they are rich, or they skew rich, right? Like, if you're working at a company, the CEO has an iPhone.
Yeah.
You know, especially if it's a Western company. And that makes it really hard to justify feature work that doesn't work on an iPhone. Like, unlike macOS and other operating systems where the users can install a more capable browser, that just is not allowed on iOS. And as a developer, I found this particularly infuriating because, and we've covered this on previous episodes, like Safari lags behind other browsers in terms of features and bug fixes. Last week, I had a problem that could be solved by CSS subgrid. And like, it's a newly cross-browser feature. I was really excited about using it. I used it. I got it working in Chrome, checked it in Firefox, looks great. Checked it in Safari, it's broken due to a bug, right? A few weeks...
Also, they have it, but it's not compliant. Or has a bug.
It was a bug. I mean, they have actually that bug has been fixed now and is fixed in Safari TP, the technical preview.
Right.
So, well, I mean, you know, what is a bug and what is non-compliant? I guess it comes down to intent. They weren't intending for it to be broken.
Right. Like, I mean, ignore my wording, but I was expecting to say Safari doesn't have subgrid, which I think Chrome actually also was lagging behind on subgrid specifically for a long time.
Yeah, so I think Chrome was last across the line for subgrid, but you know, the implementation is, well, for me, it seemed better because this particular thing I wanted to do worked in Chrome and Firefox, but not in Safari. There's probably bugs in Chrome for subgrid as well. It's just, you know, it's not what I hit at the time. But even a few weeks before that, it was creating a custom text input element as a web component. Again, it was great in Chrome, great in Firefox, broken in Safari. Like, autocomplete just didn't work. And if you're a web developer, like, this will be a familiar story to you, right? And it isn't just your imagination. Because if you go to the web platform test website, there's a dashboard there. And right at the top of the page, there's a view that shows the number of tests that only fail in one engine. And for Chrome, it's around 900. For Firefox, it's around 1,700. And for Safari, it's over 3,700, right? So it's not just your imagination. Like, this is backed up by facts.
And at the same time, there was a campaign a year or two ago that Safari had the highest web platform test pass rate or something like that, wasn't there?
Was that interop? Was that web platform test? I don't know.
You might be right. I'm not sure I remember, but there was like definitely like a, you know, active PR being made that Safari is the most compliant browser in some sense.
Maybe. And I think there's been a rocky sort of history of like Safari not being properly tested on web platform tests, which, you know, Safari is involved in the development of web platform tests. So in some ways it was their problem to fix. I think the numbers were skewed for a while. To my knowledge, that 3,700 is an up-to-date representative number, but yeah. It certainly tallies with my experience.
It's an interesting stat I didn't know existed, because tests that only fail in one browser really are the source of frustration, right? Like if there's like no browsers implemented a feature, that's not frustrating.
Yeah.
Unless, you know, it's this one capability you really want for your specific app. But that's rarely the case, I think, nowadays on average. But if something works in all the browsers, but just one browser doesn't quite do it right, especially if they have support for the feature but are not fully compliant and you hit that case, those are really the source of frustration. That is, as a stat, I think, quite interesting to look at.
Yeah, and if you know, we were talking about Windows users, you could drive them to install a better browser to get a more stable and featureful experience, which is what we did back in the day with when IE was lagging behind. You know, we would actively encourage people to adopt Firefox or later Chrome. But you can't do that on iOS because Apple has simply banned it from happening. And to use the words that the EU directed at Microsoft, it very much seems like this harms competition between web browsers, undermines product innovation, and ultimately reduces consumer choice. It just seems like the same thing to me.
Yeah.
So why does Safari, which let's remember is underpinned by one of the world's richest, most powerful companies, lag behind a financially struggling underdog like Firefox? Kind of like you alluded to there, this graph, those figures we were talking about before, it's when one browser is failing and the other two aren't. And Firefox is one of those. We've talked in past episodes how they're struggling, but they are doing way better than Safari at that metric.
It is so impressive how a browser that really sadly has fallen out of favor on average and clearly has much less resources to work with than Google or Apple manages to keep up with new features from web platform standardization.
Absolutely.
Absolutely incredible.
And I think we get some insight into the culture of this from an email sent by Philip Schiller, who's an Apple executive, and it's an email sent in 2011 to Eddie Q and Steve Jobs. And this email is titled, HTML5 poses threat to Flash and the App Store. The Flash reference dates it somewhat. But this email states that he expects a web-based solution to challenge their App Store's 30% revenue cut. And it's kind of there in black and white. You know what I mean? Like it's
yeah.
I don't know. But things are changing. The Open Web Advocacy Group has been working with regulators around the world, showing them the ways that Apple and other companies like Google that are artificially holding the web back and holding them to account. But this Apple browser ban, as they call it, is one of their main focuses. It started off with a couple of Aussies, Alex and James Moore, and they've been able to bridge this gap between the worlds of web development and regulation and legislation. But the group has grown, had this familiar names on there like Bruce Lawson, Stuart Langridge, Francis Berryman. You'll see them writing articles on the blog, doing huge amounts of work. Their Walled Gardens report, which concerns this whole sort of Apple browser ban, is an absolutely great read. It's long, but wow, it's like there's so much data in there. A lot of the content that I've been talking about in this section has kind of been from that report. It's just a great source of data. Links in the description, of course.
Yeah, I will link to it for sure.
The good news is, the regulators are starting to take note. And there's one in particular that I want to talk about, and it's the EU again. The EU Digital Markets Act passed into law late 2022. And part of that declares that gatekeepers must not prevent the installation of competing browser engines, and there must be a level playing field. The gatekeepers they name are Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, and ByteDance, who own TikTok. So, in a nutshell, Apple can't block the installation of other browser engines, and Safari mustn't be given exclusive access to particular APIs that make it perform better than other browser engines. And you'd hope after getting away with it for 15 years, Apple might be a bit, okay, fair enough, that was a pretty good run for something that was very clearly unfair. But no, they are fighting for their ability to impose a browser monopoly on iOS. This one's brilliant. They try to claim that they don't have the user numbers for regulation to apply. And the claim they're making for this is that, well, there isn't one Safari, you see. There are, in fact, 3 totally distinct browsers that carry the same name. Safari on iOS, Safari on iPadOS, and Safari on macOS. These are just entirely different, so we can't count them as any way the same. And the EU just kind of went, nice try, but no. And it probably didn't help that the main product page for Safari, and you can see this today, if you go to apple.com/Safari, it has something to say on the matter. When it comes to Safari on iOS, Safari on iPadOS, and Safari on macOS, Apple says in large, bold heading text, same Safari, different device. So, isn't that beautiful? I love it.
Amazing.
So I think the EU maybe found that more compelling, if it's Apple's own words. But yeah, like we saw with Microsoft, companies do not like being told to be fair, and they will do very silly things to try and avoid it. This act passed into law late 2022, but the deadline for compliance is March the 6th, so soon.
Hence why now all the changes are being rolled out.
Exactly. That's why it's sort of, there was a bit of noise about it in 2022, but like you're hearing more noise about it now because we're seeing the actual results of it. So Apple have got a set of rules, requirements for alternate browser engines on their platform. They say you can only do it in the EU, like, same as Microsoft did, totally as expected. They say the browser has to stay up to date security-wise. Like, okay. There are odd specifics, like the browser must pass at least 90% of web platform tests. Maybe this is just so they can kick things out of the App Store if they become, like, if they stop being updated, I guess
there could be actually a decent spirit of the rule behind that. I'm wondering, does Safari meet this bar?
It does, but yeah, I had to check the same thing as well. It does sound okay, these rules, but I am a little suspicious of them given the other things that are happening.
Yeah.
But time will tell. It does feel like progress. It does mean that Apple will no longer be able to limit what the web is capable of on iOS, which is like the key thing. But at the beginning of February, this month, at time of recording, developers started noticing something wasn't quite right in the new iOS 7.4 beta. Sites that were installed to the home screen, like PWAs, they stopped opening as apps and started opening within the default browser, like Safari.
Mm-hmm.
So they essentially were turned back into into shortcuts. And when I first saw this, I thought it was a bug, because I've had this happen to me on Android when like upgrading Android or transferring apps to a new phone. Like I used to dog food the new phones and OS at Google, and this was a bug that I had filed over and over again. It kept regressing. Google definitely felt like it, as part of that process, treated web apps as second class. So I thought Apple was just sort of in doing the same thing, but it's not a bug. This is deliberate, and they confirmed it on February the 16th. They said like installing apps to the home screen where they open as apps is like, it's just going to not be allowed in the EU on iOS. So not just in other browsers, like it's being banned in Safari as well. And we should be clear what the impact of this is, because some Safari features are limited to installed PWAs, such as push messages.
Oh, really?
So right, and we all celebrated when Safari eventually got support for push messages, like on iOS. But that feature is now being revoked in the EU as an effect of this.
So these changes are you're only affected by them if you are an iPhone user in the EU. Like American iPhones basically are not affected by this.
No.
But also American, I'm just picking American as an example, just to make that clear. But yeah, in America you also don't get the browser choice.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of minimal compliance, but also malicious compliance, I think. Because also, like, when you install a PWA in Safari, it actually sets up a new storage bucket for that PWA, like, distinct from Safari.
Right.
So your web apps turning into links to Safari is going to a different storage bucket. Like, if the user has local data, they've lost it, like, just by updating their OS.
Do you have a choice as a EU user to, like...
No.
You just screw you. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's the deal. Yeah. Now, and Apple are claiming this is to comply with the regulation.
I don't think they mandated to remove support for home screen PWAs.
Right. So the regulation requires that they provide a level playing field, which would mean that other browser engines would be able to install web apps to the home screen as well. Which we see is possible in Android, right?
Yep.
So it is possible. But Apple just didn't want to allow that, so they took the ability away from themselves as well. Like, this is like when the bratty kid loses a game and they react by declaring that the ball is theirs and they take it away so no one can play. It's proper malicious compliance. Yeah, they're saying it's a security risk because other browsers don't isolate PWA storage the way they do. And I think the way they isolate storage has pros and cons, but I think it's a stretch to call the other model a security risk. They say it will allow other websites to gain access to your camera, which is a real scaremongering nonsense stretch of what actually happens.
Yeah, I mean, that really would say more about the iOS sandboxing than the other browser.
Yeah, the only way I can make that make sense in my head is that like if you granted access to google.com/meet, then the Google Maps PWA would have access to the camera, which is true. And I kind of think I do have bad feelings about that, but I think the way they've worded it, it makes it sound much bigger than it is. And I do think that large parts of the tech press are just sort of taken their word for it as well. Tim Sweeney, who is the CEO of Epic Games, he put it like this. I suspect Apple's real reason for killing PWAs is the realization that competing web browsers could do a vastly better job of supporting PWAs, unlike Safari's intentionally crippled web functionality, and turn PWAs into legit, untaxed competitors to native apps. And Tim's got skin in the game, right? But another way to say all of that, and a shorter way to say all of that, was said in an email within Apple back in 2011. Web-based solutions could challenge their app store's 30% revenue cut. You know, it's not good.
And this is just, in a way, what you've been talking about, the very specific subtopic of other browsers on iOS, because in parallel, in accordance with the same changes mandated by the EU, there was this whole changes on that 30% cut if you are opting into alternative app stores, which are now also allowed. Which again, I do not know the exact numbers, but there was a similar thing happening where even free apps would have to pay, and I don't think I am exaggerating, people are saying like millions of dollars per year as a free app because quote unquote system fees, I think, which is, you know, like if it kind of lines up with the quote from your email that they're really worried about a source of income here. And so they're trying really hard to disincentivize going down this route, or if you do, replace that income somehow. This is obviously, you know, me speaking from without actually having read up on all of this in detail, but it seems to track.
Yes, Apple on the App Store thing, Apple are trying to charge a corkage fee, you know? Like it's like I say, it's malicious compliance. Now I want to stress this. I'm not saying that the WebKit team is anti-web. Some folks on that team have told me that the web shouldn't be for apps, that the browser should be a document viewer. But others, particularly some of their more recent hires, have worked hard on the features that make the web as powerful an application platform as it is today.
Yeah, if I've learned one thing from our time at Google is that these companies are not a homogenous blob of opinions. There's usually people in all kinds of camps and different matters and different opinions. So Apple overall seems to have a culture where voicing differing opinions may not be as acceptable or as encouraged. So that when you join the Safari engineering team, for example, and you are a known defender of the open web, you start being less outspoken on these topics, is things I have seen happening. I don't think they have actually changed their opinion, these people, but they may just be strongly incentivized to not be as vocal about it anymore. So I think there are genuinely good people on the Safari and WebKit engineering team who believe in the open web and want to make it happen.
Absolutely.
But within that team are just not necessarily given the freedom to pursue that.
Yes, agreed. And we have spoken in recent episodes about how much that team has changed over the past 10 years for the better. And we've also spoken about, similarly with Google, how our experience there is, you know, you were dealing with Chrome employees versus web employees versus Google employees, and you had to be kind of aware of the kind of person you were talking to or what mode they were in at any given time and make sure that, you know, hold them to account that they were doing the right thing for the web, because some of them were not. But although, I have a lot of faith in the WebKit team, I think Apple is anti-web. I think the actions that we've seen here are very clearly anti-web.
The mandate they're getting from the top is anti-web.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why regulation like this is so important. Like, we can't have an anti-web company in control of the web experience on a device as popular and as influential as the iPhone. So I guess my call to action is to go to open-web-advocacy.org, link in the description, of course. Their blog is really, really good. Read their reports. Because the amount of work they're doing for such a small group is incredible. Get involved if you can. They have info on who to send emails to, who to send letters to, which petitions to sign, all of that kind of stuff, to try and stop Apple from getting away with this, really. And although they've been focusing on the Apple browser ban, which I guess is now the Apple PWA ban, they're not going to stop there. Like, I know they've got plans to tackle other companies, things they're doing which are anti-web, such as Google and Meta. So yeah, important to follow them, check out what they're doing. And I guess apart from sending letters and emails, we just have to cross our fingers that the either the PWA ban, the web app ban, doesn't go ahead, or it gets revoked pretty quickly. that's where we are.
I'm curious what you think, or if you've seen other people have opinions or predictions. Is the EU gonna let this fly?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's like we saw with Microsoft. What Microsoft did was a clear violation of the rules that were set out to them, and that's why they got the fine. Microsoft claimed it to be accidental, but that, was it? Question mark. But it didn't change the fact that they were definitely not complying with the rules. Apple, what they're doing with PWAs here seems to have more legs than their claim that Safari is actually 3 completely different browsers, just have the same icon and the same rendering engine. Like I say, it's malicious compliance. They've taken features away from themselves to avoid giving it to sharing it with others. I think they're going to get away with it for a bit. And it's not, I don't know, it's not the first time that we've seen companies behave quite badly in response to an EU ruling, and it just kind of carry on, like the cookie banner stuff, right? Like, it's still a blight on the web that should have been solved in a better way, and I think it pushes people away from the web as a result onto platforms which have less privacy. But yeah, I don't know. I'm pessimist always. I think they're going to get away with this, but we can write as many letters as we want and hopefully try and change it. I don't think it'll be changed for the deadline, but hopefully we can get it overturned as quickly as possible.
I have a lot of faith in the open web advocacy group. They've proven that they can get stuff done, as you said, with a surprisingly small amount of people doing the actual legwork. So yeah, it may not, I think I agree. I don't think things will change for the original deadline, but I also think that the EU will definitely not just accept this. I think I would be surprised, because it's clearly against the spirit of what they were trying to do and protect customer choice and customer capabilities. Just like they did pass that, iPhones in the EU have to be chargeable with a USB-C standardized charger. They're similarly trying to take a stance on, if you have a device, if you buy a device, you own the device, and that comes with certain rights. And if the company doesn't give you those rights, like installing apps, that needs to be fixed. And what Apple is doing does not seem to actually give users, customers, those abilities in a way that is actually feasible. So I would hope that just from a pure customer perspective, these changes are not acceptable to the EU. I mean, obviously, I'm saying this if I have a deep understanding of how this works politically, but that's my hope.
I think I maybe tweeted this probably 10, 15 years ago. It surprises me how, when Microsoft behaves badly, people go for Microsoft, right? They will, hold them to account. Whereas when Apple does the same thing, it's kind of the cute kitten scratching me. No, you know what I mean? It's you're still bleeding, right? There has been a bit of anger in web developer circles, on Twitter and whatever, about this. But yeah, the tech press has been sort of largely just oh, there they go. That's that done. So yeah, we'll see what happens. But I worry that it's going to sort of slip under the radar in the same way that the whole browser ban in general seems to have, people just don't realize it's happening. Hence this episode,
because we know that everybody listens to this, and the world will be changed.
Look, me and you and our editor listens to this, and that's good enough for me.
That's more than enough.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Right, fine. That's my rant over.
Strong, 50 minutes. I like it.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to just cram into this episode?
Yeah, I'm thinking, but I
mean, we don't have to wait a month until our next episode if we wanted, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess we have because Lucas is on vacation.
Oh, that's true.
But we could have it recorded when he gets back, so straight back into work for him.
Exactly.
No rest for the week. Now, why don't we make this I think if we have an episode that is just about Apple and browsers, that just makes the topic even more important.
Neat little package. Well, let's do that.
Special hot off the presses breaking news episode.
Well, that was this recording has gone better than other things that I've been doing recently, because I tried to do some plumbing recently, Sama. And
that we're software engineers.
I know, and the boiler in this, because we moved house in December, I mentioned it before. The boiler keeps turning itself on for no reason for just a couple of minutes, and then turning itself off again, and I hear it during the night. And then trying to solve the problem in my head was been keeping me awake. I was getting up at 3 a.m. and going staring at the boiler in the garage, just what do you want? I don't know, right? What is wrong with you?
Isn't it supposed to do that? Keep the water at temperature?
No, it turns on when the water needs heated or when the heating needs heating, and neither of those things were happening. So the only thing I could identify on the front of the boiler is that the pressure was a little high. It was still in the green, but it wasn't in the happy green. So I tried.
Is that a CSS color?
Well, it was the same green, but it was a different border width. So it was a 2-pixel border width rather than a 5-pixel border width. If we're talking in CSS,
I really want to land happy green. Yeah. I feel like that'd be it.
So I thought I couldn't figure out how to release pressure from the boiler. Watched loads of YouTube videos, and everyone had a convenient little tap that they turned, labeled pressure release, and I didn't have one of those. So I thought, well, I know how to bleed a radiator, so I'll do that.
Is it called bleeding a radiator?
Yeah, well, you turn the little key at the top to let the air out, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but that's fucking morbid. Jesus Christ, Brits.
I know, right? Yeah, I suppose. What's the translation from the German?
I think I'm trying to remember it. I think you just drain it.
Oh yeah, that is better. Yeah. Oh well. Anyway, so I was bludgeoning a radiator down in the dining room, and it's just so I was just turning the thing, and my other half, Jen, she was in the garage. I had her watching the dial, and I was and water was coming out.
Tell me when it's in the happy green zone.
Yeah, basically. And I was like, is the needle moving? She's like, no. And I'm like, okay. So I loosened it a bit more. And I was like, okay, is the dial moving? And like, no. I was like, okay. So I loosened it a bit more. And the thing popped out, and I emptied the whole heating system onto the dining room floor.
Also, that water is the same water that's been in there for a while, isn't it? Did it smell good?
It smelled of metal, and I smelled of metal. And the wall smelled of metal because it's coming out at high pressure, and my instant reaction is put thing back in thing. But when you try and do that with gushing water, it just then sort of sprays out, and the dirty metally water sprays all up the nice white wall, making it no longer nice and white anymore. So yeah, it's gonna have to be redecorated.
Nice. Well done.
And it wasn't. And do you know what? Didn't even solve the problem.
Do you know what was the problem now?
Yes, because Jen's dad came round, and and he knows DIY, and to be fair, we were both sort of staring at it going, why is it doing this? And he unscrewed a thing and opened up a thing and cracked open a thing, and there was a frost protection thermostat there set to 20 degrees Celsius.
Now, which is famously the freezing point of water.
Exactly. Yes. Of what I know of science, frost is not a major concern at 20 degrees. So. All right, then. Do you have anything more to say for yourself?
Any last words? No, we made an episode that is under an hour.
Amazing.
it's been a while since we've done that. It's probably not unwelcome to some people.
Absolutely. Yeah, the old 1 hour, the old neat 1 hour. Oh well. Well, I guess with that, we can thank Shopify for their sponsoring, letting us do this, and not telling us what to say and do, and just paying for the hosting and letting us get on with it, and the editing, of course. And thanks to Lucas for the editing as well, who is
but don't leave this in. You don't want his ego to get too big.
Oh yeah, we're thanking Lucas, but he has to edit this out. That's the rule. So with that, I guess we'll say, happy next time.
Happy next time.
Bye. Nice. All right, my doorbell's gone now because it's going to happen to one of us per episode, so I'm going to go and pick this up.
I wonder what Jake is receiving at the door right now.
Thank you very much. There you go. Thank you very much. Cheers.
It's kind of nice to know that Jake talks the same way to the post deliveryman as he talks to me.
Yeah, okay, I'm back. Yeah, I've you speak about radiators, and then stuff arrives. I've just received a whole load of radiator valve automated Zigbee things.
That's something we should talk about at some point.
The
whole
absolutely
home automation rabbit hole that we have collectively started to get addicted to.
Yes, because it is a very well run open source project. I think there's a lot we could probably learn from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.